Hi, welcome to Ruby's Ask Me Anything office hours. My name is Dan Marek. I'm Director of Plant-Based Culinary and Development here at Ruby. And in this platform, we're opening it up to questions for our students, so you can ask any culinary questions that you have, and we'll answer them live. A little bit of housekeeping. You can ask all your questions by clicking in the box on the top right-hand side of this video where it says Add Questions Here. Just type in your question and hit the black icon that says Add. After you've added your question, it will be moderated by our staff. And if it's in the queue, then you can upvote other questions that are in there by hitting the heart icon. So if you see a question on the right-hand side, even just now, you can hit the heart and it'll bring that question further up to the top and it will be answered first. We're typically able to get through most of our questions, but if not, you can always email us or we'll get back to you on any of the questions we don't have answers to. So with that, we're going to get started and jump right into our questions for the week. Our first question is actually from Catherine. I need a substitute for onions and garlic. I cannot tolerate either raw or cooked, and most of MD recipes use them. Any suggestions? So this is actually more common than most people might think, actually. Some people can't tolerate onions and garlic. And quite honestly, the easiest way is to be able to omit them from recipes. Now, there are a couple workarounds that I've heard of before. Like it depends if you can't eat any onions and garlic at all. So if you can eat in the family of those, sometimes green onions or chives might be a nice substitute for the onions. And some other types of garlic might work, but if you can't do them at all, it's usually best just to omit those from the recipe. Now, there are some kind of workarounds sometimes you can use. So like in a basic mirepoix, it's typically a celery, carrot, and onion. You can actually just omit the onion from that and cook down some celery and maybe a little bit of carrot into that to be able to get a little bit of a flavor profile you're looking for. That won't be quite onion, but it'll be similar on the palate because so many people are used to the mirepoix taste having that celery and carrot. I would definitely be heavier on the celery and a little less on the carrot as well. But by and large, if you're allergic to those ingredients, usually you want to keep those out. All right, I hope that helped, Catherine. Our next question is from Tammy. When making stock, what are some ideas to use leftover vegetables? I blended them with some soaked cashews to make a veggie dip. Any other ideas? I'm sure there are many, but I'm a loss to come up with more. So that's a great question. And I actually get that question a lot from our stock making course or stock making task. Now, quite honestly, if you're making the stock correctly and you're cooking that, you're going to get most of the flavor and most of the nutrients out of your vegetables as you're cooking the stock. The vegetables will release the nutrients and the flavor into the water, and what you're left with is just kind of a mushy vegetable that doesn't have a lot of taste, and definitely doesn't have a whole lot of nutrients that are left in it. But there are some. So a lot of people do like to be able to use those because you don't want to just throw them out. Now, typically the way I avoid that to begin with is I actually make my stocks using scraps. So I'll use things like onion peels, the peelings from carrots, the ends of carrots, the inside of peppers, and I'll save all those in a baggie and then put them in my freezer when I'm done cutting them up on a nightly basis or whenever I do that, and then save them for the end of the week or when that bag gets full, and then I'll make a stock out of it. Then I don't feel as guilty about composting or throwing those things out because I've already used them once and I'm using them a second time to be able to make the stock. Now, some other variations, if you're using something that's just not the scraps from the vegetables, like we show in the stock making task, I get that where you're taking all these nice vegetables and your carrots and your celery that are all just the actual carrots themselves, not just the peels. And it feels like it's really weird to be able to throw those out or just compost them, but you have gotten most of the nutrients out of those. A lot of people do want to do things like making a dip is a very popular thing to be able to kind of blend those up. I have seen people especially when they're trying to get their kids to eat more vegetables, where they'll blend them up into a pasta sauce. So they have more of the vegetables in the pasta sauce. Again, you're getting most of the nutrients out of it before as you're making the stock. So just cooking those typically and putting them in might be a better way to do that if you're trying to get your kids more of the vitamins from those. What I used to do a lot was I would actually use some of the leftover scraps and the things like that, and I'd mix it into dog food for my dogs, especially carrots and stuff like that. No kind of strong ingredients. They would really like that to be able to have it, and it would have them just eat their dog food a little bit quicker, and they'd get more nutrients from it as well too. And it was something like a nice treat that they love to be able to do those too. Now, some other ideas you can definitely do, like the cashew, to be able to add a fat into it is wonderful. If you want to make, a dip, you can blend them up and do like a spread or something like that because you will get some flavor out of it as well too. But what I would recommend is adding some other spices to it if you're going to do that as well, just to be able to get a deeper flavor out of those. Because again, if you're doing it properly, you're getting most of the flavor out of those vegetables. But experimenting a little bit to be able to see what works great for you. I've seen people use them for all kinds of different things, including, um, like I said, the pasta sauce, but some people even put them into, like lasagnas or different, like, kind of pasta bakes and things like that as well, which work fine. You just have to remember that the texture is going to be really, really squishy. You're not going to get a lot of tooth feel out of it, and you're not going to get a ton of flavor or nutrients out of it. But looking at ways to be able to reuse those and not have a lot of waste is great. Composting is always great as well because you can take those vegetables and grow new ones with them. So that's a couple little things that I would recommend for it, Tammy. And I'm sure the dip actually came out pretty good. So that's a great use for it as well. Our next question is from Cynthia. Can you help me understand how to have a business working out of a commercial kitchen, but not having a brick and mortar structure of your own? So this is something that I know a lot of different chefs that do this. So it's basically if you have a business, let's just say you have a vegan food truck, okay, and you have I don't know 5 different items on your menu. A lot of people, instead of making all the food on their food truck, will actually rent a space in a commercial kitchen, which is a brick and mortar, but not the one that they actually own. So they'll do a lot of their prep work in that commercial kitchen, and they will then stock their food truck from that. Now, the reason a lot of people do that is because it's a much bigger space to be able to utilize. They're typically air conditioned, and they're also food permitted, which in a lot of states you have to have a food permit to be able to sell to the general public, and you have to be able to have proof of where you're actually cooking your food from. So, a home kitchen is not always the best place to be able to do that, to be able to keep under certain state and local guidelines. So, cooking in a commercial kitchen that you're actually renting a space is a great way to be able to, have a little bit more time and prep ahead of time before you're actually taking it out to whatever thing you're doing. It could be a farmer's market or a food truck or something like that, where you're creating a product in a commercial kitchen. It's under safe conditions, has hand washing sinks and sanitizers and all the kinds of things you need in a commercial kitchen to be able to keep according to state and local laws. And then you're able to be able to take it sealed to like wherever you're going to, from your food trucks to your farmers markets, to all kinds of different ways to be able to utilize for your business without actually owning a brick and mortar structure yourself. So that's basically how most people use commercial kitchens when they have a business in food. Somehow is they'll actually rent a space for a couple hours. Usually it's like a set number of hours per week is the way most commercial kitchens like to do that. So like if you're doing, I don't know, making cookies or something like that, it might be every Wednesday you're renting a space for 5 hours at the same time, to be able to do that the next week. So that way you set up a rapport with the owner of the commercial kitchen as well, and you kind of slot that specific time off to be able to make that happen. And then you take your product to be able to sell it after the fact. So I think that's what you're asking, and I think that hope that answers a little bit of questions around commercial kitchen usage if you do have a business. All right, our next one is from Linda. Hello, Chef Dan. As I spend time using various recipes from Forks Over Knives, I'm wondering about the use of oil in salad dressings. Please, can you advise me some of the things I might use in place of the oil? Thanks so much. So, yes, in Forks Over Knives, they do avoid oil in pretty much all cases. Now, salad dressings are one of those areas that people are always a little confused by because the use of oil is so prevalent outside of Forks Over Knives. Now, things you'll see in the Forks Over Knives tasks, if you haven't gotten to the salad dressings yet, we do offer a host of different dressings, from a Caesar to a Chipotle. There's a fig balsamic. There are a couple different versions in there, but you're not going to see like your typical oil-based vinaigrette. What we're really trying to do is make the dressings based out of food and try to keep the fats basically a little bit lower, because that's really the reason that in Forks Over Knives you're avoiding any oils, is you're avoiding processed foods. 140 calories per tablespoon of any kind of oil. So if you can avoid that, it's definitely going to help you on your journey for Forks Over Knives. So if we're looking at different dressings from Forks Over Knives, like the balsamic vinaigrette is typically like a dried fruit that has been blended up with the different herbs and spices and balsamic, which creates a really nice kind of sweet dressing for it. But if you're looking for something like a Caesar, you might be doing something like a seaweed, and you could do cashews. I like to actually use silken tofu, and then do garlic granules and chives and some seaweed in that as well too. Then blend it up, and it's a great dressing to be able to put over things. It doesn't have a lot of fat to it. I'm not actually adding any fat to it, but it does have a good protein source as well. It's full of flavor, depending on the herbs and spices that you actually put into it. So you'll see once you get a little further into the class, there's a wide variety of different ways to be able to make no oil dressings that really help add nutrients, but not a lot of fat to your salads, or whatever you're using the salad dressings for. A lot of people use them for dips for different vegetables as well, which is a great use for those recipes. So good luck on your journey, Linda. Our next one is from Yvonne. How long can most of the dressings, like the Dijon lemon tahini and the Dijon vinaigrette, and sauces like the sweet and sour sauce, keep in the refrigerator? I'm thinking that they'll keep a long time based on their ingredients. Yeah, so that really depends on the dressing or the sauces you're talking about and what the ingredients are. So typically things that have, like a lot of the fats that are in those, or I guess some of the acids even too, like an orange or something like that, will last a little bit shorter amount of time, but some of them will last longer. So, if you're making, like I know like the Dijon vinaigrette lasts a good while. Technically, they always say about 4 to 5 days is how long you want to keep a fresh made sauce. For some of the dressings, you can keep them a little bit longer as well. So, I would say the 2 week maximum for most of those, but that still could be a stretch. So you just want to be able to make sure that you're checking on them regularly. If you're getting any kind of growth on it or weird smell, it's definitely time to get rid of that. But typically, a 4 to 5 day period is what they say to be able to do that. But I personally have stretched it over a little bit longer. But just keeping an eye on the product for both visual and for smell, and you'll be able to taste it pretty much right away if something's off on it. All right, our next one is from Robert. What's the best way to clean burned on remnants from a stainless steel skillet? We've all been there, Robert. The best way to be able to do that, that I always use, is I will put the skillet back on the burner with enough water to coat the bottom or the burned area and bring it to a slight boil. Once you do that, it'll start to help release a lot of the product that's stuck to the pan. And I actually have like a little plastic scraper that I use to be able to get it off, and it comes off like that. I don't even get it to a boil. As soon as it starts to heat up a little bit, you'll see how that starts to release off the bottom of the pan. You're basically doing like a deglazing almost, right? So you're basically getting a lot of water and a lot of moisture to get into those little burnt remnants and be able to take those bottoms off from that stainless steel. I wouldn't do the same thing in like a skillet or something like that. It's a different thing. You want to be able to keep some of the flavors on that as well. All right, so Yvonne, how long can sauces or spreads made with beans last for? I think they go bad within a week. I just don't want to make too many sauces or dressings too far ahead. So very similar to the last question you asked. With beans, it's a little bit shorter amount of time. So about 5 days, definitely on those. 2 weeks is going to be too long for a bean. But for dressings, sometimes it can go a little bit longer. But if you're doing things with spreads or sauces made with beans, I would say 5 days is probably the kind of max you want to be able to look out at that. If we were looking at 2 weeks, you would definitely get a definitely odd flavor coming off of them. All right. So our next one here is from Lenore. And the recipes I've seen so far in the course, softened butter is mentioned. Are we going for a certain temperature here? Thank you. No. Typically when you talked about softened butter, that means room temperature butter. So I'm not sure which course you're in or which class you're in, but any of them, if it's vegan or if it's animal based butter, you're basically looking at butter that's been kept at room temperature, typically at least 24 hours. So you'll see that'll actually happen. Ah, so I just heard that you're in the intro to pastry. So that's again, if it's animal based, you're going to make sure that that's kept out for about 24 hours to make sure that it's softened. If you did something like microwave it, it's going to melt all the way down into a liquid form, and you want it to be able to make sure that it's soft but not melted all the way. Hope that helps. All right, Yvonne. What can you add to a recipe to tone down the heat or spice level from such food as chilies? That's actually a wonderful question. I've listed a link here right underneath here from milkpick.com. And there's a great scientific kind of reasoning behind this. So, what happens when you're getting like a chili or something on your tongue is that's like an oil that's spreading on your tongue and it's clinging to your tongue. So, if you're adding water to that, it's going to spread that and it's going to actually kind of make it a little bit worse. Now, there are certain chemical reactions that happen in milk based products like yogurts and milk itself, or sometimes cheese, that help to kind of counter react that oil spreading over your tongue and start to the protein and fat starts to actually take out that kind of oil, if you will, off of your tongue that's making it heat up so much. Now, when it comes to vegan foods, it's a little bit different because if you're doing like a vegan milk, like an oat milk, for example, that's mostly water based. So you're going to have, it's not going to work the same way. In the same way where if you were just drinking water to cool off your tongue, sometimes it can make it worse. Like something like oat milk would actually have the same kind of reaction. Um, but there are a couple that will actually work much better. One of them is a cashew milk, another was an almond milk, and coconut milk, actually. So all three of those actually work much better because there are more of a fat than more water in it as well. And that fat helps absorb some of the heat that's coming into it. It's not going to be as prominent as some of the milk products might be, but almond, cashew milk definitely kind of helps out with those things. And coconut milk actually happens or works really well with that too. You'll see that that's one of the reasons that you'll see a lot of the Indian or Thai dishes that have a lot of chilies in them. It'll actually help tone it down because of the coconut milk that actually is in there, and that chemical reaction that happens on your tongue is a little bit different. But if you want to get more information on that, I definitely recommend seeing the article that I posted here on MilkPick. It really goes into the science of how that chemical reaction works, both with dairy, and it really spots non-dairy milk and vegan milk helping with spicy food. So I hope that helps, Yvonne. All right, another one from Yvonne. I'm making the cabbage soup today, which calls for leeks. I don't use leeks very often, but I remember that leeks need to be cleaned first. Just mentioning in case others didn't know this, YouTube was great in reminding me ways to clean them. Yes, so leeks are very dirty. They capture a lot of dirt in them, and they have those kind of fronds that kind of come out on the top. I typically like to cut those off just where it's starting to get green, and then cut off the root, and then I'll split it down the center, and then run the whole thing under water, kind of pulling back each little rim so you can get all the dirt that collects in each one of those. So that's typically the way I'm going to be able to clean those out. You can also, quarter them and then long ways, and then be able to cut those out or wash those out as well too. But by and large, you do want to clean most of the produce you're actually doing before using it as well. Just some of them are a little bit more dirty than others. Leeks are one of those. Spinach, always a sandy, leafy green as well too. So yeah, but definitely wash your leeks before using them, or you'll get a lot of sand in your mouth. All right, so Catherine, I have a mandolin slicer, which is kind of a hassle to put together and clean. As my knife skills improve, will I even need it? It's kind of scary. Thanks. Yep, mandolins can be scary, and I've known many, many people to lose the end of their fingertips using them. So a good mandolin, it shouldn't be too hard to be able to put together and clean. One thing I always recommend using with mandolin is using a cut glove. They sell a glove that basically makes it so you can't really cut through it using a knife or a mandolin or anything like that. I highly recommend using those with mandolins. I personally do it every time I use a mandolin, and I've been using them for years and years. I just do it as a safety precaution because I've seen so many people that have lost the ends of their fingertips using a mandolin from just moving them over. Now, as far as your question on knife skills, yeah, your knife skills could get so good that you can cut as thin as a mandolin. But it takes years and years and years of practice to be able to get there. And quite honestly, even most chefs that I know, if you're going to do something like shred cabbage, they're going to use something like a mandolin or a food processor to be able to, get that specific cut. There are also certain techniques, like if you're doing like a zucchini, to be able to get it so paper thin that it curls really easy to put around a salad, or use a zucchini noodles or ribbons or something like that. Then a mandolin is something that's just so perfect because it gets such a uniform cut on it. Whereas the hand, even if it's really precise, you can still get a little variation in the top versus the bottom of the cut just because of pressure. So mandolins definitely something, over years, you'll get better at your cutting by hand, but mandolins are just one of those things. If you're looking for certain cuts and repetitive, like thousands of them, mandolins might just be your best bet on it. But also remember that most food processors actually have some sort of mandolin setting on them. It's a disc that goes on the top that'll either shred things or do a small cut on them too. So those are actually great things to do as well. Also, not the greatest to clean, but it gets the job done. All right, Yvonne. Another one from Yvonne. Are there any reasons to choose one over the other when it comes to dry heat cooking, roasting, and moist heat cooking, steaming or boiling? Steaming seems to be a quicker method, but the flavors are different. To, but are the flavors different doing it one way or another? They absolutely are. So, roasting in particular is going to start to caramelize the outside of something, where it's taking the natural sugars from something, let's just say butternut squash, and you'll start to get a browning that happens on the outside of that, which creates a whole other depth of flavor. It's almost an umami flavor that adds to the outside of that butternut squash. Whereas if you are steaming or boiling, again, completely two different techniques there too. The steaming is basically taking the steam up and heating it to, you're basically heating it using the vapor from the water, which retains a lot of the flavor, but doesn't add a lot of additional flavor to it. In fact, doesn't add too much additional flavor at all. But boiling, if you were to say, put something like that, um, I can't remember what I said. It was the butternut squash. So the butternut squash, if you put that into a pot and boil it in water, you're going to lose a lot of the flavor and the nutrients into the water. So you're also going to end up with a much kind of a softer cut on those as well too, so it'll be a little bit mushy in the mouth compared to the other two. Where steaming, you can cut it off a lot quicker, you can test it a lot easier than you can in the boiling as well. But just different techniques for different types of things that you're doing. But if you're adding flavor to it if you didn't add any kind of spices or salts or anything like that to it, roasting is definitely going to give you a bit more flavor out of something than steaming and boiling will. Steaming will get you the true flavor of the vegetable, definitely, and boiling is going to lose a little bit more of those. So hope that helps you. All right, I'm going to mispronounce your name on this one. Sorry, Zayato. What's the problem if my lemon pound cake is a bit too dry? That is very specifically for a baking course, and one that probably uses dairy products. So I'm going to refer you to probably Nicole from the pastry school to be able to answer that question. I'm not 100% sure why a lemon pound cake would be too dry, but that's not my area of expertise. Sorry, not to be able to answer that on you, but you can also write us at support@rouxbe.com, and we'll get that to the right person, specifically somebody who teaches that course, and we'll definitely get that answer back to you. Sorry about that. All right. Emily, hi, Chef Dan. I was wondering, by studying with Rouxbe, would this help me be better at getting a job at a restaurant? Yeah, it would. That the nice thing about Rouxbe is you're able to study on your own time. You're able to complete dishes and techniques, really taking, the knowledge that you're basically getting from this course, you can take those directly into professional kitchens. At the end of the courses, we do offer certificates of completion, and you do get accreditations from the American Chef Federation and the World Chef Federation. All those different things are great things to be able to have on your resume when you're looking to get a job at a restaurant. Um, and Having the skills is really the number one thing to be able to get into a restaurant that can help you out. So a lot of times, if you're looking to get a job at a restaurant, one of the first things they'll do is ask you to sit down and do a series of techniques. And with the Ruby courses, you learn most of those techniques, depending on the course you're taking. Now, if you're just taking one of the lessons or something like that, you're not going to get everything you would need in the restaurant. But if you're taking Culinary Foundations or Plant-Based Pro or something like that, you're going to get a lot of the skills that you would use in the kitchen right away for those. And the better you do in your courses and get the feedback from them and really focus on your techniques, especially with knife skills, the more that's going to impress the restaurant that you're trying to apply with. So it absolutely will help you get a job at a restaurant, just by giving you the confidence and the skills and the technical level that you need to have when you're working at a restaurant. And then, of course, I always say that the best skills you can get are on the job. So having being the longer at your restaurant, the better your skills will get as well. But it's good to have a foundation before walking in the door, just to be able to get hired better. Because if you don't have the skills walking in, it's going to take a lot more people to train you, and take you a lot longer to be able to get you to the position that you probably want to be in. All right. So, Yvonne, are there any reasons to choose one over the other when it comes to dry heat cooking, roasting? Oh, I think we already answered that one. All right, here's one from Brian. Oh, that is a different one. So, Yvonne, are there any reasons to choose one or the over when it comes to dry heat cooking, roasting, and moist heat cooking, steaming, boiling? Steaming seems to be a quicker method, but the flavors are doing it one way or another. Okay. Yep. So again, I'd probably go with roasting just because it's adding more flavor to it. Steaming does happen a little bit quicker sometimes, just depending on what you're doing for it. But roasting is going to give you a little bit more of that umami and the caramelization on the outside that starts to happen with that, where steaming basically will give you some of the true flavor of the vegetables, and boiling is going to start eliminating some of that flavor and nutrients from it as well. So, Brian, hi, Chef Dan. Any tips for someone trying to get a job in food with zero experience? I'm taking the Ruby course in bread and pastries, and I'm interested in applying to my local bakeries. Thanks. Brian, that's a great question, and you're doing a great job and a service to yourself taking those classes if you're looking to be able to get a job at a local bakery. So, when I wouldn't say you're going to be at zero experience by the time you go through the bread and pastry course. There's an amazing amount of information that is packed into those courses that Chef Jackie put into those. And the more you kind of take notes, and the more you reference that course, the better you're going to be in any bakery. I might recommend, instead of just using just the notes, column that you have in the course, is to maybe get a notebook and write out some of the techniques and some of the things you need to remember from those courses as well. Because the more you have that knowledge and the more it's ingrained in your brain, you're not going to have zero experience, because you taking this class, you'll also get your certificate from that. And you can go in and show off some of your skills to be able to start off. A lot of times when you're looking to be able to get a job at a restaurant or a bakery, they're going to ask for your experience right off the bat. And sometimes the best way is just to show them, to be like, hey, like if you're going to get a job at a bakery, go during the hours and maybe talk to them and say, look, can I come in tomorrow morning when you'll be cooking, and I can show off some of the skills while you're doing other things, and you can watch over some of the things that I make. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But having the course experience behind you is wonderful. Having a certificate of completion and actually showing, that you have the badges and things like that from the courses will definitely help when you're looking to be able to get jobs out in the field. And that the baking and pastry or the bread and pastry course is fantastic. The other two courses are really good too, but definitely kind of dive into those. Take extensive notes as much as you can, and you'll be surprised at how far those take you. All right, so Lucia, hello, chef, and thank you. Can you explain the best way to clean fresh mushrooms? I've heard conflicting things over the years, and I'm confused. You and half the population out there. So I've heard conflicting things all the time as well. Here's what I do personally. Personally, I will keep the mushrooms in the exact state that I bought them from either the grocery store or the farmer's market. Typically, I'm going to keep them in a paper bag. I'm not going to keep them in plastic at all to be able to give them a little bit of breathing room on them. And then directly before using them, I'm going to do one of two things. I'm either going to give them a very quick rinse off in water, or I'm going to use a mushroom brush and brush off all the excess dirt that I can find on them. Depending on how dirty is which technique I use. If I see that there's just lots of dirt on them and they're caked in mud or something, I'm definitely going to wash them in a quick bath directly before using them and putting them in the pan. The other method is basically to be able to just brush them off with a mushroom brush or a paper towel or something like that, typically dry, and you can actually do that ahead of time too to be able to prep for it as well. So, two different techniques for those. A lot of people say never get your mushrooms wet. You don't typically want to do that unless you're using them right away because they can develop other growths and stuff on them. So you don't want to do that as well. So if you wash them, put them directly into the pan after you wash them. Otherwise, use a dry technique to be able to brush the outside and the dirt off of them. All right. So Cynthia, Chef Dan, I'm very new in the essentials class, and I'm starting to do some no oil saute, but I'm not getting the proper water bubble in the testing in the heating pan. It hasn't bubbled in one little bubble. I have a Cuisinart saute pan suggestions. Um, Part of this is just getting the technique down and practicing it over and over, Cynthia. So um, there what you're talking about is getting that little mercury bubble and being able to have that in and getting your pan just the precise heat to that. It's usually a medium high for that, and heating your pan just to the point where you put water into it and you're able to see that one little what looks like mercury basically kind of floating around in your pan is the perfect timing to be able to do that. Now that being said, I don't look for the mercury bubble every time I do no oil saute, and I do no oil saute a lot. Sometimes I'll just get the pan up and going and get it heated, and I'll start to put the ingredients in just when it starts to warm up. I'll move the pan just a little bit, but once I start to see a little bit of browning happen on the bottom of it, then I'll start to move it quite a bit or stir it. If it starts to brown a little quicker than I want, I'll deglaze with just a tablespoon or two of water to be able to take some of that browning that's sticking to the bottom of the pan and put it onto the top. And just mix it over to the top of those. So even if you're not getting the mercury bubble technique that's happening on that, that's totally okay. You can actually, just put the things into the pan and then watch for the browning. If it's something like onions, it's really easy to see. Mushrooms a little bit hard, but you'll see they'll start to release their water into them a little bit. And then just deglaze with a tablespoon or two of water, depending on how much of something you're cooking. And that should work just the same way too. And it works just fine to be able to do that. You can deglaze many times. So if the water completely disappears and you get browner and browner, you can deglaze again to take all that brown off the bottom of the pan and put it onto the vegetables. Hope that helps. All right. Lily, what are your three best and important kitchen tools? That would be a very sharp knife, cutting board, and what would my third one be? I mean, honestly, it's going to be your pots or your pans. A good saute pan and like kind of a deep, maybe 6 quart pot would probably be my top things to be able to do. Now, there are all kinds of other things you can go out there and get fancier with. A food processor or a blender are wonderful. Food processors might, blenders will do a lot of the things that food processors will do. Keeps it a little more contained. So if you're going to pick between the two, a blender might be a good option for that as well. But I do love using both of those options, food processors or blenders, for just different items. Now, there are all kinds of gadgets and tools out there, but really a good knife and a cutting board are probably the best tools you're going to be able to have in your kitchen. And they're really the most essential. Everything else is kind of like to make things easier, right? So the food processor just makes chopping quicker, right? The blender is something you can't do just with a knife and a cutting board because it turns it almost into a liquid. So the blender might be my third tool besides a pot or a pan in there too. All right. So, Cynthia, any suggestions on getting my first food processors? Speaking of, I have a small counter space or cupboard, and I've not wanted to get that extra equipment, but I see it's highly recommended. Also, would you rather start small at a lower? I would also rather start small and lower price range. That makes perfect sense, Cynthia. So, I did a lot of work with teachers in public schools, and we're doing a lot of teaching them how to cook at home. And one of the items that I always did recommend was a food processor, and I found one at even like a Walmart for $34 that was small, compact, and did what we needed it to be able to do. So that would probably be my recommendation. For an inexpensive one is go to like a Walmart or a Target and do a little bit of price comparison. Some of the things you want to look for on a food processor. One, is it water safe? So will water just splash out the top if you turn it on? So you want to look for a rubber seal around the top of the bin. um, you want to look for if you can, if it has two blades, that's great. If it has one blade that's metal that chops things, and one that is plastic, which will typically help with doughs and basically helping with doughs to be able to mix those. Some other great things are if you can get one of the discs that goes in the top that if it shreds one way and then you flip it over and it does a mandolin setting the other way is great. Now those might be some more expensive ones in the $35 range, might not have some of those, but you might be surprised what they're doing today. So definitely take a look and see what you can find. Looking for some of those options on it, but you don't have to spend a lot of money on a food processor. Even the food processor I use that was, kind of expensive has like, well, I wouldn't say it was more expensive, but it had three different cups that folded inside of each other, four blades, and like six of the different settings and the discs you could put on the top. And that was like the kind of top end one that wasn't a commercial version of that. And that was like around $200 for something like that. That's the very high end of a food processor. So there's anywhere between those, the $35 version up to something like that. And the $35 version is much smaller. It's easier to clean, and you don't have to worry about it falling or anything like that as well too. So the $35 one is a great place to start, and that's definitely what I would recommend. All right, our last question here from Julietta. For the kimchi recipe in the Plants Plus class, I was wondering how to better assess the bubbles. I saw them, but only when I stirred the kimchi. So that does happen, and it really depends on how long you're fermenting your kimchi. I like a long ferment on a kimchi. But typically, if you put like a chopstick or something into the top of the brine, you'll start to see some of the bubbles release, and that's kind of what you're looking for. You're not going to see them just start to. I mean, unless you're really looking at it or you have a camera directly on it, you're not going to see the bubbles just kind of moving out on their own because it needs a little bit of movement. Think of it like seltzer water, right? So if you just look at a bottle of seltzer water, you don't see the bubbles coming out of it, but as soon as you start to move it, you get the bubbles that are kind of coming out the same way. So kimchi's very much in the same way. If you put a fork or a chopstick into the top of it, you'll see some of the bubbles kind of finding their way through all the crevices of all of the cabbage and different vegetables in there. And that's typically when you're going to see your vegetables come through. Now, if it's in a long ferment and it's been there for a while, you're probably going to see some more of those bubbles pop in just on their own, just by opening your, or opening the jar or something like that. You'll definitely see the bubbles popping up and kind of going through. I think the one that we recommend is at least 3 days. I typically like to go for mine like a 7-day ferment at the very minimum on my kimchi, but that also gets it pretty funky and gives it a little bit of edge to it. So that's really a personal preference. I always tell people to start trying your kimchis at the 3 to 4 day period to be able to see how the taste is on it, and then go for a longer ferment if you want to. So, you're not going to see a lot of bubbles kind of coming out or shooting out at all, unless you get a much longer ferment on those. But typically, even in longer ferments, they're not going to pop out unless you poke something into it. I hope that helps. All right. So those are all the questions for today. I hope they helped, and I can't wait to see you in some of our courses and help some of the grading. So happy cooking. Have a wonderful day.